Live. Hi everyone, welcome to another session of In Conversation with David Stride. And today we have Dr. Dawn Kernagis as our guest, where we're gonna discuss about C2 space. Let me just introduce to you the moderator of this session, or the interviewer, may I say, is none other than David Stride from Australia. David is a regular speaker and also a presenter at regional and international diving events with a background in military, commercial, recreational, and technical diving. He is also a former field editor for Asian Diver magazine, who has authored several hundred articles about diving and organized several world-class technical diving events as well. He is a recipient of the ADEX Lifetime Achievement Awards for contributions to technical diving, and also the ADEX Ambassador for technical diving as well, and also a fellow of the Explorers Club of New York. Our guest today is, of course, Dr. Dawn Kernagis. Dawn is actually an assistant professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of North Carolina. She studies ways to protect the brain and also nervous system for individuals in high stress environments. In 2018, Dawn received the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society's Young Scientist Award. She also, in addition to that, have made certain research since 1993 with a team of members with numerous underwater exploration projects over the years. In 2016, Dawn was selected as a crew member of NASA NEEMO XXI Undersea mission based on her background in underwater exploration and also diving medicine research. Dawn was inducted as a member of the World Divers Hall of Fame and also a fellow of the Explorers Club. Herewith, without any further delay, let's get into the conversation, and I'll pass this session over to Strikey. Strikey, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. And Dawn, welcome. It's very, very good to see you again. I think the last time I saw you, we were actually in Sydney at Oztech some 2 years ago, very briefly. And the time before that was, of course, at ADEX in Singapore, when we had the opportunity to spend some meaningful social time.
Oh boy. There's some recordings of that social time too, I've heard. So, both fantastic conferences, and it's so good to see you, Strikey, and thank you, Nora, for the introduction. That was great. So happy to be here today.
So whereabouts? You're in Florida at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm living in North Carolina now full time, but I'm actually temporarily in North Carolina or in Florida for 4 weeks right now, working on some projects. So we had some projects, some human research studies that were put on hold last year due to COVID. And so we are starting to ramp those back up and get them finished up down here in Florida at my previous institute. So,
okay. And just to kick this off, how did you get into diving, Dawn?
Yeah, so I wanted to dive since I was about 8, 9 years old. So we moved to North Carolina from Iowa in the United States. So Iowa is landlocked, no ocean whatsoever. We moved to North Carolina in the United States, which is, on the East Coast of the United States. And we made a trip down to the ocean, and I felt absolutely in love with the ocean. And I was like, I want to be a marine biologist. This is what I want to do. And so I laugh at, my parents bought me all the Jacques Cousteau books, the Jacques Cousteau Ocean World and the Dolphins and Cetaceans, I think. And I carried those around my backpack with me almost every day. So I think I was training to carry doubles or carry tech equipment at a very young age. But got into it and finally was able to get certified when I was 15, and just absolutely, head over heels for being a diver and being underwater. So
where did you dive?
So initially we got certified here in North Carolina. So, and the rock quarry there. So that was kind of our training ground. That's where I got open water certified. And then pretty quickly after that, I started diving in the springs of Florida as well, and offshore in North Carolina. So there's some really great wreck diving, actually incredible wreck diving off the coast of North Carolina. But then we also would do monthly trips or so down to the springs of Florida. And this was when I was 15, 16 years old, and I was going as much as I possibly could. And that's where I fell in love with cave diving. So
how did you start in cave diving then?
So one of those spring trips, and I kind of laughed because my dad and my sister actually came with us. It was a shop trip. So the dive shop would take a bunch of people down and we dive all the springs that we could possibly get in a weekend. And my dad and my sister were there, and there was a cavern at Jenny Springs, Jenny Cavern, which is pretty much set up for open water divers to go into. So there's a grate, so you can't go too deep, you can't go too far into the cavern. And I was just jonesing to go check it out and see what was back there. And my instructor at the time was a cave diver. And so he said, I'll take you back there. He talked to my dad about it. And I laugh now that I think about it. My dad stood on the edge of the spring and watched his 15-year-old swim into a hole in the ground. I'm sure his head was just exploding. So, but he let me do it, which was fantastic. Like, he trusted me and he trusted my instructor. And so we went and did this cavern dive, and I was like, oh, I just want to know what keeps going past that grate. So I eventually, over time, got permission to do some informal cave diving training, and then finally formal cave diving training, and just fell in love with that as well.
And this was all in Florida?
All in Florida, yeah. So I was living in North Carolina, but just going down to the Florida Springs as much as I possibly could.
So because you were also involved with the WKPP in those early years when they were just knocking out records left, right, and center, weren't they, in terms of cave penetration?
Yeah, that was an super interesting time to be part of the tech community. I worked on a couple of cave projects, including a sump diving project called the Nesbitt Springs Cave Project in Arkansas in the Ozarks, and that was right after I got out of high school. I worked on that project with some folks, and then did a little bit in Mexico as well. And then I was just kind of looking around. This is back in the early days of the internet. I'm going to age myself here. So the early days of the internet, when there were some of these forums where people, and email lists where people were discussing exploration that was taking place. And I saw these updates on this project, this Woodville Karst Plain project, and some of the really cool stuff that they were doing. This is back in the mid 90s. And I eventually ended up going to the tech diving conference that Michael Menduno used to run alongside DEMA. And at one of those conferences, I saw George Irvine and Jared Jablonski talking about the WKPP. And I eventually just went to Jared and I said, look, I want to mentor. I want to learn how to do this kind of diving. And will you guys take me on? And they eventually said, absolutely, yes. You got to first come and carry lots of tanks and do a lot of surface work first, like everybody had to back in the day. But I was like, I'll be there next weekend. So it was a pretty easy jump in.
This was the days of the Tech Diving Forum, wasn't it? And the DIR, the Doing It Right sort of wars.
Yeah, for better or worse.
Yeah, so you were sort of very involved in that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, it's cool to see the influence that kind of diving has, or that kind of approach has had in the current diving community. But obviously, it was pretty volatile back in the day. So there's a lot of internet banter and personalities. We'll say that, characters and personalities that I worked with, and I mean that. Had it not been for some of those personalities, I probably wouldn't have gotten into that kind of diving at the time. But it was just cool to see the evolution. Like, if I look back now at, the scooters, when I started working with the WKPP, they were using modified Techno scooters still. And, anyway, I'm not going to talk about the gases we were breathing, but we were breathing gases that people's heads would explode, knowing that we were breathing those gases to the depths we were. But it was an evolution, right? It's not like we all had the answers coming out the gate. That kind of diving definitely evolves, and it's still evolving to this day. So it's pretty cool to see where it was then and where it is now.
I remember you'll probably recall.
Oh boy. Yeah.
I think you actually get a mention in the front of it as a thanks from Jared for your contributions there. Yeah,
so Global Underwater Explorers grew out of the WKPP and the type of diving that the Woodville Karst Plain project was doing, and that doing it right mentality. And so when GUE first started in '99, I actually joined them quickly thereafter and was their first formal operations manager for about 2 years. So moved down to
Really?
High Springs, Florida. Yep. I don't know if you didn't know that, but I went down. I had been helping with some of the educational material, just editing material back in the day. Like that book that you just showed, and doing some photos. There's some photos in there too of me, which anyway, I'm not going to ask you to look for them, but young Dawn. But yeah, it was a pretty cool opportunity just to be part of that organization and to see where it is today and how globally spread out it is and the influence that they've had. So it was pretty neat to be a part of all that.
Yeah, and certainly, as you said earlier, some of those characters, the George Irvine was really sort of the bête noire of technical diving, wasn't he? At one stage, it was.
That's a good descriptor.
Yes, it just shows I'm educated.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny.
Thought I'd slip that in case people thought it was just dumb. What were you doing? You were studying at the same time, so presumably doing your postgraduate work, or?
So I was an undergraduate. So when I started with WKPP, I was 19 years old. And so I was an undergrad at the time. I was studying at the North Carolina State University and studying, started off as another major, and it kind of transitioned because I think everything in science is interesting. So I eventually landed on biochemistry as my major. But I was doing that while I was working on these projects, and finished that up, and then went to GUE, and then did a little bit of postgraduate work right after that. And then had kind of this gap of time where I was trying to figure out what my next steps were, because I loved working in the diving industry, but I felt like there was something bigger that I wanted to do, and maybe a bigger impact that I wanted to have. And I knew I loved the science. There wasn't a really good track. So what interested me was how the human body responded, the extreme environmental physiology aspect of things. Watching our divers with WKPP really push themselves, physically and physiologically. I mean, we had people coming just to see how we were doing the dives we were doing at that time, because they were pretty experimental, and, just the different gas mixes and the different profiles and everything. So a lot of questions popped up. Why, David, you and I were talking about this before the interview, but, why are some individuals susceptible to decompression sickness, seemingly more susceptible to decompression sickness? Why are maybe some individuals more or less susceptible to oxygen toxicity, for example? So I had lots of questions cropping up, and I wanted to start to figure these out, but there was no formal program to do that. So I was kind of like in this in-between phase between transitioning from the diving industry to going into academia, where I was like, I know what I want to do, I just don't see the clear path to do it. And I eventually did figure that out. So.
Right, but I mean, I found that fascinating, that little sort of snippet that you were sort of doing research into genetics, and the fact that some sort of Navy divers would be more susceptible to the bends because of their genetic code.
Yeah, so that project, that was my thesis project. That's my PhD thesis project, and it was funded by the Office of Naval Research in the United States. And originally the plan was that the focus was going to be on WKPP divers. And we ended up having all the caves flooded out. And so for those of you who don't know the cave systems in Florida, they are underwater, so they're always flooded. But when we say flooded out, it means that you have backflow of dark water into those cave systems, so that you have no visibility. It's just not really diveable for exploration. So there's a huge, a long shutdown of dive season for WKPP. And I was sitting there in my PhD program going, okay, I have funding to do this project. I've got so many years to do my thesis, and I have no divers to study. I don't know what to do. So I ended up going to colleagues, actually David Dulett, who worked with me on the WKPP, and also a very accomplished environmental physiology researcher, and said, and I talked to him and some folks that I knew at the Navy Experimental Dive Unit in the United States, and said, look, you guys are doing these test dives with humans. Would it be possible to collect samples from them instead? And so it actually worked out great, because that's a much more controlled environment for collecting samples like this compared to collecting them in the field. So we're collecting blood samples from them. And then we were testing out, we were looking across all of the genes in their body, how those genes are turned on or off in response to decompression stress. And so it's this new technology that instead of just looking at one gene or one pathway in the body, we were able to look at how the whole system responds to decompression stress, which is pretty cool. So.
And how far has that research progressed?
So we have that publication. So we're actually just get the publication out now, just due to some restrictions on getting things out the door. There have been other people who have looked at some of these, some different gene markers, but that specific research actually had some pretty good control groups in it. So we had hyperoxia control, so high pressure oxygen control. We had exercise controls. We had time of day controls. So there's some really interesting targets that I would like to pass along to the next phase of researchers, the young researchers that are out there, because I think there's some really interesting targets that could be tracked down in both field studies and in lab-based studies. So yeah, I'm super excited.
That's I just found that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thanks.
Did you actually apply to the Navy how did you get involved with the Navy?
So I knew some researchers there just through the diving we were doing with the WKPP. Right. Navy Experimental Dive Unit is not that far from the Woodville Cars Plane Project in Wakulla Springs where we were doing those dives. And just through the diving community, I knew a fair number of people. Like I said, David Dulett, who actually worked with the WKPP and was working with NEDU. So kind of backtracking a little bit, I had this research idea that I was talking about, and I pitched it to one of the lead researchers at Duke University back in North Carolina. So I actually used to be one of his research subjects for quite some time. His name is Richard Moon. He's like one of the godfathers of diving medicine and diving physiology research. And so I went to Richard. I was so nervous. I remember I was about ready to throw up when I went to pitch this to him. He was the nicest human being, and I don't know why I was so nervous, but I was just, I wanted to see what he thought of my idea. I wasn't sure if he was just going to shoot it down. And essentially he said, I think this is a great idea, but we need funding for this. And so I said, okay, well, how do we get funding for this? And he said, well, you have to write a grant. So we talked about it, and there was a grant opportunity through the Navy that was open. So about every year, the Navy opens up for a small window, an opportunity to submit a proposal for research. And this happens even to this day. And all the federal agencies here do that. And so he gave me a sample grant for something else that he had funded, and said, this is what a grant looks like. So I went to town and wrote my first grant, and it got funded. So I had a very biased view of what grant funding looks like. Typically the funding rate's like less than 10%, but I was able to get funded. And I don't think it was because of me. I think it's because I was working with Richard Moon and the people at Duke University. Yeah. But anyway, so that got funded, super excited to get, be able to do the work. And then I said, well, I wonder if I could turn this into a PhD project. So that was not the original intent. And so I went to the Navy. They said, we love the idea. We've never funded, through this program, we've never funded a PhD researcher, but you can be our test case. So no pressure. And then I went to Duke and I said, hey, I've got money. Can I turn this into a PhD project? And they're like, well, yeah, that's pretty unique. So we worked it out. So I still applied to the program like everybody else, but I got into the program, and I laughed that I think the only reason Duke accepted me was because I had money. So I don't know.
Yes, good stuff, isn't it, for getting things done?
Yeah. So it's been this cool path. Just kind of trying to figure it out. So
what you were doing, sort of combining your research studies with cave diving?
Yeah, so that, like I said, that was the original intent, was to work with WKPP and the groups that I knew, but just everything got put on hold so much. I ended up doing more work directly with the military. And then there was a bit of a delay just in general, because I was doing my PhD work, which ended up having all these different components to it that included cancer research, which for the sake of the podcast, I won't go or the podcast interview, but I'm happy to chat about it if you want me to. But there's a lot of tie-ins with using that technology I was telling you about that looks at all of the genes. There's some other approaches we were using that technology for cancer diagnosis. So that's how my thesis ended up summarizing, was a little bit of diving research, a little bit of cancer research.
Really?
Yep. So breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was... So, and what happened after that? After you'd written your thesis?
So I originally was actually supposed to go to medical school at University of Auckland. I don't know if you knew that, Strikey. So I was supposed to go. Yeah. So I had spent some time while I was writing my thesis with Dr. Simon Mitchell and his wife. I
Yeah.
stayed over at their place and was actually writing part of my dissertation thesis at their house, at their beautiful mountain house outside of Auckland, New Zealand, on their invitation. And it was fantastic. And I just fell in love with the country. So originally my plan was to actually go to medical school, and for personal reasons, my dad got really sick and had some other things happening back in the US. I made the decision to not do that and do my postdoc. So I did my postdoc at Duke University in the Department of Neurology and Neurocritical Care, and continued. I always had this background research going on with diving research and diving medicine, but then we were also doing research on head injury and how the body responds to head injury, and then looking for treatment, some different treatment options for head injury. So that was a really cool opportunity. And then I was recruited a couple years into my postdoc. I was recruited by an individual here in Florida who runs an institute called the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, IHMC. And he was looking for somebody. He was reaching out in the community, looking for somebody who did extreme environmental physiology and performance research. And so I was recommended to him, and he and I connected up. And the funny thing is when I met him, I just thought he wanted to collaborate. I didn't think he wanted to actually hire me. It didn't fully make sense why he wanted to hire me at the time. And long story short, I met him, came and gave a talk, went to a couple of meetings that he had, and he said, I want to hire you. And I want you to build a research program here that doesn't exist. We have no lab, we have no infrastructure, no, like there's nothing set in place, but we want you to build it. I was like, it's super exciting and a little daunting, but when do you get that kind of opportunity, especially as a young researcher? I mean, that was just so far out there. So I ended up taking that opportunity, and I'm super thankful that I did.
Where were you based doing that?
So that's in Pensacola, Florida. It's actually where I am right now.
Right.
And so we built this program. So I was there for 5 years, and we built a program that actually ended up consisting of about 16 researchers by the time I left. And we have a pretty extensive lab for doing hypoxia, high altitude testing, and immersion testing, and exercise physical performance testing. So I'm super proud of what our team did there.
This is all linked to the extreme environment.
Yeah, all linked to the extreme environments. Yep.
Yeah. And that sort of, in a sense, leads on to the NEEMO experiments that you took part in.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the NEEMO, the background to the NEEMO.
Yeah, so that was a cool one. So again, like one of the things about taking the position at IHMC is our director is super well connected, and just I felt like it was just going to be this amazing opportunity, not just to build a program from scratch, but also to meet folks in the industry and meet folks in research that I would never get the opportunity to meet if I were at a big university, or it would take some time for me to get the chance to meet them. So the first year I was there, we had a meeting that consisted of folks from NASA and the Navy talking about overlap of human physiology and performance related to both sea and space, undersea and space. And during that meeting, one of the people who attended was Bill Todd. And Bill Todd is the founder of NEEMO. And long story short, he ended up inviting me. The December of 2015, I got a call. So we talked about me doing a research project with them for NEEMO in 2016. So I was ready to do that, and was super excited just to have the opportunity to do research with them. And he contacted me in December 2015 and said, what do you think about diving for the NEEMO project? And I said, I mean, I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll scrub the bottom of boats, I'll do whatever you guys want. Like, I would just love to get in the water around the NEEMO habitat. He's like, well, actually, we're thinking about you as a crew member. And so he and one of my mentors were on this call talking to me, and I was speechless. Like I was just jaw on the floor. And they said, what do you think? And I said, I mean, you don't have to convince me. If you want me there, I'll be there tomorrow. So they invited me to be part of this mission, and it was definitely a life-changing opportunity for me. So,
how deep is the habitat?
So the habitat resides at about 60 feet. And so 50, 60 feet. And yeah, so we're breathing air the entire time. We're under pressure. So the thing is, for the folks that are not familiar with the NEEMO mission, is that it's an undersea habitat. It's located in the Florida Keys. And it is, like I said, you're breathing air the whole time, but you're under pressure. So you're saturation diving. So after they consider at 24 hours, you're in saturation. So at that point, it's going to take you about 16 hours to come back to the surface safely. So you have to handle everything that comes at you, there under pressure, instead of like, you can't come to the surface, just like a cave dive. But, this is a pretty long ascent back to the surface. So,
and you're in close confines.
Yeah.
How many people were there, Dawn?
So we actually had 6 crew members for our mission, and this was a unique mission. So you can actually only fit 6 people into the habitat. You have 6 bunks in the habitat. 2 of those spaces are given to the technicians, to the diving hyperbaric habitat technicians, who are very experienced technical dive, or not technical, but more commercial and military divers who have saturation diving experience and have lived and worked in that environment extensively. And so they're just keeping us alive, essentially, and keeping the habitat running. So the rest of us are all crew. So normally it would be a 4-person crew, but for this mission, they actually had 6 people. And they wanted to practice what a crew handoff would look like for this mission. So it actually ended up being 2 back-to-back 8-day missions. So it was a 16-day mission overall. We had 4 crew members go down for the first 8 days, and then they did decompression, came back to the surface. 2 crew members came up and got out of the water. 2 of those crew members stayed down during that time. And then 2 of us splashed down. I was in the second half of the mission. 2 of us splashed down and met those remaining 2 crew members. And then we were recompressed, and we had another 8-day mission. So we were living with 6 people total in this habitat, but we had a total of 8 people involved over the entire 16-day mission.
What was the mix between male and female? Was it equal? Or?
No, so it was actually, I just want to give a shout out. So we had there's one other female next to me, and then the rest are male. And so the other female was Megan MacArthur Bankin, and she is she was one of our 2 commanders, and she was actually the commander for my half of the mission. So they had a commander handoff too. So Reed Wiseman, who's a NASA astronaut, he's actually currently chief of the astronaut office. He was our first commander for the first half of the mission, and then Megan took over as second commander for the second half of the mission. She's getting ready to launch on SpaceX this April. So super excited to see, my commander, my friend, launching. I'm super excited for her. And she's a shuttle astronaut, so she's flown before, and she actually was the last person to touch the Hubble telescope. So she operated the robotic arm that repaired the Hubble telescope. And she's just an incredible human. They're all incredible. Like, we had such an incredible crew, and everybody got along. Like, to this day, we still communicate on a regular basis, and yeah, super lucky.
What was the background to training for the mission?
So so we had lots of teleconferences and everything leading up to. So there's a lot of science involved in the NEEMO mission, just like they have for any kind of space mission. And they had us on calls mostly with folks from some of the science teams, just getting a feel for like what the projects were going to look like. So that was for a couple of months, and then I always tell people it was really cool when you're told you have to report to Johnson Space Center for crew training. So when you're not an astronaut, that's a pretty cool thing to hear. So we went to Johnson Space Center for a week of training, and it's the first time we all met each other. And I will tell you, as the non-astronauts meeting the astronauts, the first day you're super nervous, and everybody's sitting around this big conference table. And but we clicked off like super, super fast and easy. Everybody got along so well. And we actually just did a little cookout that night just to get to know each other as crew. And from that point on, we were fast friends, which is great. But we ended up, so we just did a lot of like hands-on training for the science. We did swim tests in the neutral buoyancy lab at Johnson Space Center, which was definitely a highlight. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the neutral buoyancy lab.
Is that the one? I've seen those images that you had, the very deep, sort of huge pool with a simulated space station.
So it's a space station mock-up in a pool, about a 40-foot deep pool. And it's absolutely, when you walk in, the first time I ever saw it, the person I was walking with, who said, just don't jump in. I was like, well, I'm fully dressed in a suit. Why would I jump in? And you walk in, and you see it like, oh, I completely understand why people just want to jump in there. It's just amazing. So we got to do our swim test in there. And so my story from that is, so this is your first time kind of showing your capabilities as a potential crew member. And they had us do a time swim. It wasn't anything crazy. And we had to do an underwater swim as well, just showing that we're comfortable in the water. And so, but we get to swim over this mock-up of the space station it's like we're swimming laps in this giant pool over the space station. It was crazy. So we start off, they have us all line up on the wall, and they're going to time us for our swim. So I have my hand on the wall, and I'm like, I am just giddy. I'm like, my cheeks, I'm smiling so big. They tell us go, and I push off underwater, and I open my eyes, and I see the space station, and I smiled so big, I inhaled a bunch of water. so I'm swimming and like, do not choke. Do not let them see that you're choking right now. So that would be a bad start. I got through it. I mean, it was fine. Like, I was fine within a couple of strokes, but you can appreciate since you're a swimmer, David. So and I was kind of laughing, and I was like, that's a great way to start this swim. But and then we had to tread water and some other stuff. But beyond that, we did first aid trainings, oxygen administration training, just a lot of stuff, just so that we could all make sure we keep crew safe. And so, yeah, it was a week of that. And then after that, we went back for about a month, and we had some just residual things to train up on and study up on for those science projects. Like I said, we had over 20 projects that we were working on during the course of the mission. So we had a lot of science.
Really?
Yeah.
What sort of projects?
Yeah, so we were testing out, so we had anything from testing out medical equipment that was allowed you to relay medical information back to the surface. So, the idea is that this equipment could be used on space station. So, and they wanted to test it in this extreme environment. How well does the crew work with it, and what kind of questions crop up for the crew? We were testing this really cool device called a MinION, which allows you to actually measure RNA, so genetic information from samples that you collect. So typically, a machine that allows you to do this back on ground or back on Earth would, the typical thing we would use in a lab is pretty big. It's like it covers a whole bench top. It's a pretty big device. This thing fits into the palm of your hand, and you can actually plug it into your phone for a readout. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the idea is they developed this so that they could do this measurement of RNA and look at samples in space, or even in different field environments. And so NASA had been working on developing the protocol for this device. And so we all tested it out separately. That was probably the big one, because it took most of the day for each of us to test it out. And then, we were able to collect a random sample in the habitat. So I like swabbed behind the garbage can, which I was like, that's probably going to be one of the nastier spots to swab and see what we can capture there. And then we just ran it to see what kind of bacteria and what other things what came out in that sample. So that was really cool. And we tested out exercise devices that were potentially going to space station. And then we had a bunch of things outside of the habitat. So we weren't just working in the habitat. We also did excursions outside of the habitat. And those looked a lot like spacewalks. So they called them, so in spacewalk is called an extravehicular activity, or EVA. So these are referred to as EVAs as well, but they were out in the water outside of the habitat. So kind of water walks or ocean walks. And so they had us weighted to simulate partial gravity. So we were standing upright, wearing our Kirby Morgan helmets and doing surface supplied, or not surface supplied, but habitat supplied diving. So we had umbilicals the whole way out. And we were doing a lot of different marine biology projects and testing out some devices they developed for exploration of planetary surfaces. So we had a bunch of different projects associated with being outside of the habitat too.
How long in any sort of given day would you spend outside in the water?
So we alternated. So 4 crew members, and so Megan and I were an EVA team, and then my other 2 crew members, Matthias and Noel, were an EVA team during our part of the mission. And so it took up most of your day. If you were an EVA crew, that was a good part of your day. You did some other experiments inside the habitat, but for the most part, that was a big chunk of your day. So so every other day, so we got to do, I think, 5 total walks. So we did like 1 practice one, and then we did 4 across the rest of the mission each, at least I did, and the others who were only in there for
Right.
8 days did. So it was cool though. So, I mean, the water walks lasted we went out to about 100 feet. So the habitat shelf drops out off from about 55, 60 feet down to 100 feet. And so we would do excursions all the way out to 100 feet for some of our projects and working on just different things. We were working with lots of different universities on projects they wanted to do for marine biology. So we had this, we were in saturation, so we could be at depth for a long period of time to get some work done at depth. So they were taking advantage of that. And those dives usually lasted around 5 to 6 hours, sometimes a little bit longer. If we were doing really well, then they'd tack on more stuff for us to do. So we'd be out there a little bit longer. So that's pretty cool.
And so presumably you were testing an awful lot of stuff for NASA for use in space missions, but also just general sort of, for want of a better term, marine biology as well.
Yeah. So, yep, for both. So it was really neat because most of the projects kind of had a 1-2 punch, right? It wasn't like it was just being tested for NASA. It was being tested for, future field studies, or the data that's being collected was from marine biology projects or marine ecology projects, or, medical research projects of some of the stuff we were doing on the inside. So it was pretty neat to see, just the impact that those experiments had. And then the next year, just by the way, I went back just to support the crew, the follow-on crew. And I just want to kind of go down and support the researchers and the divers who had supported us during our mission. So I just went down as like dive support for the following mission.
Yeah.
And we got to see, so for example, we planted these coral trees through the foundation, it's a coral foundation that's out of the Florida Keys. And they actually have programs all around the world where they plant these coral trees. So it's like little coral seedlings on a plaque that are hung on a PVC tree. And they are allowed to grow essentially for about a year or so. And then they harvest those corals and actually replant them in areas where coral's been devastated, typically because of traffic or whatever. So we were actually doing that, but we were doing it at depth. So typically most of the coral trees that are planted are shallower just because of restrictions on dive time. But since we were in saturation, we could be out there for quite some time. We were doing the planting out to about 100 feet. So the cool thing was the following mission, I actually got to see our little seedlings that we had planted at 100 feet coming out of the water and being harvested for planting. It was pretty cool to see, the fruit of our labor, so to speak.
What was the psychological impact of being there? How long were you down for?
So I was down for 8 days, and it went by way too fast. I could have stayed for quite some time. And like I said, I think a big part of it was that we had such a great crew, and we had such a great crew dynamic that it was super easy. But like I said, I was sad to come up. Not that I didn't miss people back on the surface, but but it was pretty amazing. And
being very fond of food as I am, what was the cooking arrangements? How did you? Hot meals you cooked?
A lot of camping meals. So we had a lot of different camping meals, and you just add hot water. So we had a quick hot water source for those. We had some fresh stuff, but fresh stuff doesn't last very long. We had a really, really small fridge, and it wasn't a super cold fridge, so stuff wasn't going to stay in there very long. So if they did send, I will say this, that was one part of this mission that wasn't exactly like space, because we did have people coming in and out, not coming in and out of the habitat per se, but they were swimming to the entrance of the habitat and back to like take waste out from us, or bring fresh food to us, or bring fresh materials to us, like fresh water, for example. So, and that's obviously not going to be like space station. But there's one time where we had, they sent down some fresh lettuce. I will tell you, the thing I craved coming back up, all of us craved actually, was a giant salad. I just wanted like a fresh, crispy salad with like lots of good vegetables, because you've just been eating camping food the entire time. So they did send down this lettuce, and they sent down apples, and they sent down this jar of brown. It was just this brown sauce. It wasn't labeled or anything, so we had no idea what was in this jar. And so one of the guys opened it up, tasting it, thinking it was going to be caramel, and he tasted it. It was balsamic vinaigrette, so very different taste. So he was a little bit surprised by that. But actually Megan ended up making salads for all of us, and it was like one of the best meals I think I've had, because she made these big beautiful salads with balsamic vinaigrette and apples, and so it got kind of spoiled.
How did you cater for the different tastes in food? Because presumably some people would be vegetarians, some vegans, some meat eaters.
So we got to pick our food beforehand. So they actually gave us a list of all the camping meals that they had, and so we
Right.
got to pick our food beforehand. So I'm vegetarian, for example, so make sure that there's enough food in there for me to eat, which is great.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, when you're not super hungry, I mean, you eat because you know you need to eat, but I can't say that we're starving. Oh, I do know Megan also made some chocolate chip cookies that she had frozen and sent down for us, so that was a big treat for us as well. But I will say, like, so you lose a bit of your taste while you're down there, so you don't taste as well and don't smell as you don't smell as well either. I've got a story about that in a second, but so I mean, so you actually put hot sauce on a lot of your food, or put things on it to make it more flavorful, because you just can't really taste as well. So
Really?
yeah, so the smelling part's interesting. So we're under pressure, so we just don't smell the environment as well. You're just kind of going through your day. So when at the end of the mission, when you go through decompression, they essentially seal off the habitat. So then it's like being in a chamber, like a hyperbaric chamber at that point, and they decompress you. So you're sitting on the bottom, but they're decompressing the actual chamber, the habitat, overnight. And the next day, you're essentially at surface, and so then you're kind of like a submarine, right? So you're at 1 atmosphere, but you're sitting on the bottom of the ocean still. And they had us go through some different medical checks to make sure people didn't have decompression sickness and everybody's fine. And then once everybody's okay, they have to repressurize us to the bottom. And that way they can open up the habitat and we can put our dive gear on and swim out. And so when we had that moment where we were at 1 atmosphere and all of a sudden you can smell again, the habitat smelled so bad. we were like, man, we stink so bad. And you're just living in it, not knowing. You just don't know it until you're at normal pressure. And it's like, oh man, this is awful. Get us out of here. And they recompress and you can't smell it again. So I mean, that part was good. But
How did that? I mean, it sounds bizarre, but how did people sort of cope in terms of ablutions?
as far as
Well, showering or
yeah. Sorry, that's me being an American. So so we did have a shower. So actually, it was required that anytime. So I told you about going on the EVAs. Anytime that we went out of the habitat, you had to shower before you came back in, because they didn't want that salt water and that salt accumulating inside the habitat. So our shower was actually combined with the toilet in the main, like when you came out of what was called the moon pool. The moon pool was the entry and exit in and out of the water for us when we were doing EVA. And that's where all the dive equipment was stored and everything. So our toilet and our shower were all one little area with a closed curtain that was right behind the closed circuit TV. So you had to make sure that you were doing everything behind the curtain before you came out. So, and it was funny because for our mission, we actually had a toilet. In previous missions, they didn't. They had to actually go outside of the habitat into a gazebo outside of the habitat and just kind of let everything go to the ocean. And they've had some bite incidents in the past, so they the toilet, which we were not arguing with in any way, shape, or form. So,
yes, I can just imagine all the fish life being attracted. Yeah.
Oh, so so the funny thing is that the story, toilet humor, right? So when we were training for the mission, and we got notification that we were actually going to have the toilet halfway through our training at Johnson Space Center. And the funny thing is that some of the previous people who had been aquanauts on the NEEMO mission were laughing. They're like, well, you're not a true aquanaut unless you have to use the gazebo toilet outside. If you get a real toilet, that's not really doing it. It's like, whatever, we'll take it. We're not going to argue. But they were telling us, like, before all this, that you had to, so they gave us a checklist of everything we need to pack for the mission. And so one of the things was your kind of toilet kit. So you had to have a swimsuit to wear, and then they wanted you to have mask, boots, and fins. So the mask, boots, swimsuit all made sense, right? So you have to go out into the moon pool. You essentially kind of reach over, like under, like outside of the habitat, and you can actually, like, it's enough that you can reach over and grab the edge of the gazebo that you have to duck into. And then you're walking across this platform and you duck underwater, like hold your breath, duck underwater, go up into into this gazebo, this gas-filled gazebo, do your business, and leave. But then they said we needed fins. I was like, well, you're not swimming anywhere. Why do you need fins for that? And they said it's because of the fish, because the fish get so excited and they're like all swarming at you. It's to swat the fish away from whatever you got to do and try to keep them from biting. So anyway, yeah, like I said, we were happy that we got a toilet.
So were you ever sort of tempted to join the forces, the Navy, as a result of all of that?
Not after the fact, just because I was a little bit older. I mean, at this point in my career, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
I will say that when I was younger, I definitely wanted to join the military. I talked to my dad about it, and my dad was Marine Corps. And, you know, I had a fair bit of military background in my family, but, you know, we talked about things and he said, you know, if you can go to school, do this, you know, just kind of go down this path and see what you like. And then if you still want to go to the military, then we can talk about it. And I kind of revisited a couple of times, but just the way my career path went, it just, you know, just wasn't a good fit. So what I will say is that the work that we do now, it supports the military. And that's, you know, I have so much respect for the military, just like yourself, David. And I want to be able to give back in any way, shape, or form that we can. So I hope that the work that we're doing is feeding back in a positive way and supporting the military. So
what, as a result of all of that, were you tempted to go into space yourself?
Yeah, I've given it a thought. So I actually put my application in for astronaut. So I don't know if you know, so NASA has their applications open up every so many years, about every 3 to 4 years. And the funny thing is I had never put my application in because I just never thought that I would, you know, that's what they were looking for. I was like, I'm not a fighter pilot. I'm, you know, it's a diver. I was always just kind of focused undersea, to be fair. And so during this mission, I was like, well, it'd be kind of cool to apply. I'm an older applicant for sure, you know, so not too old. Like I'm definitely still in the age range where they'd select. So they just opened up last March, they opened up astronaut applications again. So I did put my application in and we'll see what happens. And I think they're planning to announce selections by the end of this year. So we'll see.
And then what happens? You go to the Johnson Space Center again. And
so if when people are selected, those who are selected as astronaut candidates, they go to Johnson Space Center and they spend 2 years training actually as astronaut candidates. So they go through pretty intensive training, and then they're assigned over time to different missions, and they also do things to support the other astronauts and the other crew, and over at Johnson Space Center, some of the research at Johnson Space Center as well. So yeah, so we'll see what happens. I will tell you, I love where I'm at right now. I love, the job that I have right now. I love the work I get to do. I love being back in North Carolina. So, it's the thing. I was like, if I don't put my hat in the ring, I will always regret it. And I think it would be fantastic, but it's a long shot. They had over 12,000 applicants for this last application cycle. Wow. And they're going to select probably around 10. So it's a long shot.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, wish you all the best with that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And so just leaving Nemo to one side again, with the equipment, you said you were on air there.
Yeah.
You had been using, obviously, mixed gas for the cave explorations. Mm-hmm. Did you ever go on to rebreathers?
A little bit. So I was part of the WKPP that was anti-electronic rebreather. So this was back in the day when everything was still pretty controversial. So I did do a little bit of work with the Halcyon PVR BASC.
Oh, that was the thing that looked like a refrigerator.
Yeah, the refrigerator, aptly named. So I did work with that a little bit. I did some dives on the Prism rebreather and some other rebreathers back in the day. I think I just kind of missed the era, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it just wasn't really in my wheelhouse. Like I will tell you, when I started with WKPP, the exploration divers were still on open circuit. And if you think about the world record dives that they were setting on open circuit, it's just insane to think that they were not on rebreathers. And so all the backup bottles and everything that had to go into it back then. So I've thought about training. I actually, this is kind of funny. So I know you've had Phil Short on this series, and, I've known Phil for quite some time. And I actually won. So we were working on a research study with the Interspace down in Grand Cayman, where they had the rebreather divers doing, repeat deep dives. And so I was working with Divers Alert Network at the time, and we were doing research on those divers. And at the end of Inner Space, they have a raffle or a drawing for all these different prizes and everything at the end of Inner Space. And I actually laughingly won a certificate for training with Phil Short. And this is, I've known Phil for quite some time. So I was like, I'm going to do my rebreather training with Phil. And we just have never made it happen. And just a lot of it's just timing. He's so busy, and, life has been busy for me too. And we just haven't made it happen. But I still have that certificate. So I will take it.
Oh, redeem it one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be superb.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'd be fun.
It's, there'd be a lot of fun. And you were also elected to the Women Divers Hall of Fame as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a huge honor. Just a huge honor. So Amanda Cotton is actually the person who nominated me for the last round, and I'm super thankful to her for the nomination and all the support from everybody. But I'll tell you, the first time I sat in a Women Divers Hall of Fame meeting at DEMA, at one of the DEMA shows, I sat in that room going, these are women that I have looked up to since I was a little girl getting into scuba diving and read about in magazines and books. So it was definitely, I had goosebumps for sure. So it's definitely been an honor to be a part of that program.
And of course, it's not just an organization that just dishes out an award and gives you a pat on the back. They actually do accomplish a great deal and support up and coming divers.
Yeah, their scholarship opportunity is just amazing. So I've had the chance to do a little bit of work on the review committee for that. And then this year actually was super exciting. So we actually started a new scholarship opportunity, or grant opportunity, through Women Divers Hall of Fame called the Laurel Clark Sea to Space Extreme Environmental Physiology Research Grant. And it's in honor of Laurel Clark, who was an undersea medicine. She was a diving physician, but she was Navy captain, but she was also an astronaut, and she was actually killed in the Columbia accident.
Right.
And so she has this amazing career, amazing human. So her husband is actually a mentor of mine. So he and I work together, and he's supporting this, his funds and supporting future researchers in the field of extreme environmental physiology. So we had 2 grants that we awarded this year. It's the first round of it. So we're super excited about that. And it actually one of the grants went, and I did not review them because I didn't want to be biased, but one of the grants actually ended up going to one of my trainees from my last institute. So I'm super excited to see her taking her next steps too.
Yeah. And you're also a fellow of the Explorers Club.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will admit, I've yet to visit the Explorers Club. So that's on my list. I don't know if you have, Strikey, because I know you're.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay.
Jane has. Jane Jenkins sort of goes sort of quite regularly and brings back stories about it. I sort of get all twitchy. It's, yes, it's one of those sort of ambitions one day.
Well, we'll have to have some giant Explorers Club reunion for all of us, once.
Oh, yes.
Pandemic, so, yeah.
And see if they have a little karaoke machine.
Oh, no.
There would be Richie Kohler would, of course, as a member, and Jill. Yeah.
Yeah. And Evan, I think. Yeah, I can't imagine Evan's not.
The viewing audience probably don't appreciate or realize that Dawn has a magnificent alternate career as a singer.
Yeah, farthest thing from it. Yeah. So David, so we had a fantastic time at ADEX 3 years ago, and stumbled across this little karaoke bar that had all kinds of interesting characters in it. And we ended up singing the night away, or trying to sing the night away. David, I think you definitely had one of the better voices amongst the group. So
no. But I am told that some people have recordings of that evening, and are promising to sell them to the highest bidder. But Dawn, what other exploration activities have you been involved with, quite apart from the WKPP?
Yeah, WKPP was a big one for me, but I was able to work with Project Ocean Discovery over in Sweden for 2 different summers. So that was fantastic opportunity to do some wreck exploration in the Baltic. So Richard Lundgren and their group. This is,
Really?
again, kind of back in the day. Yes, this is like the mid 2000s. So some of the best diving that I've had the chance to do, actually. It's just absolutely gorgeous diving the Baltic. Obviously cold, but absolutely beautiful. So
Yeah.
that was a really cool opportunity. And like I said, I've worked on some sump projects, and then I worked with the EKPP a little bit. So same thing, just during my time over in Europe, I worked with the European Karst Plane project, so kind of the sister project to WKPP, and joined them for some work over in France. We did some work in Mexico as well, and that was a lot of fun. So it was actually some of the WKPP team members went down to Mexico and did exploration in some of the caves down there for I think it was a couple of weeks. So that was a fun project to work on. And those caves are around Merida in the Yucatan Peninsula, Merida, and just absolutely gorgeous and heavily unexplored. So lots of opportunities down there. And yeah, it's been a fun ride.
It's mostly sort of caves. That's your primary sort of interest, is it?
Yeah, caves are definitely my primary interest. And I've had the chance to work on some other like marine biology focused projects and things along those lines. But the caves definitely my passion. And I will tell you, like, just I've even kind of consulted on other projects. So with the WKPP, I was a diver with them, but my big role with them was when they were doing the big pushes, I was the operations or dive manager. And so managing the divers, the equipment, the gas supplies, the food supplies, everything. And so I've consulted on other projects as well over the time, just to kind of give feedback on lessons learned from the work that we did with WKPP, which is a lot of lessons learned over the years doing those kind of dives.
With the just back to the Baltic, and you said you were diving with the guys there. Did you get to dive on the Mars?
No, I did not. That was all pre-Mars. So this was in like 2005, 2006. So yeah, so it was a little earlier on, but again, just some of the most gorgeous wrecks I've ever seen. Just the ambiance, the lighting on those wrecks, and just the hue in the Baltic is just so different from anything I've seen anywhere else. And and how well intact those wrecks are. I've never seen anything like that. It's like you're swimming in a museum. So I don't know if you've done any diving there, David, but it's
no.
Okay.
But I've listened to Richard talking about the area there and there.
Yeah, and his videos that he has, I mean, that's a really good example of what those wrecks look like. It's just beautiful. So
that's wonderful. We're getting sort of close to the end of the session at the moment. In fact, I think we're perilously close. So what are you so your work at the moment, Dawn, is you're the assistant professor of neurosurgery?
Yeah, neurosurgery. So I'm still doing all the extreme environmental physiology work that I've been doing, but I'm also doing work that translates to clinical. So we can learn a lot from humans in extreme environments and how they respond to extreme environments that can be applied clinically and vice versa. So we can learn a lot from patients, for example. So we're looking at ways to protect the brain and nervous system before somebody goes into surgery. And those same approaches could potentially be used for divers or people going to altitude to protect their brain and their nervous system from those stresses. So there's a lot of crossover. And you'll know, like Simon Mitchell, for example. Simon Mitchell works in anesthesiology, chair of anesthesiology or anesthesia at Auckland. And he does a lot of crossover work similarly. Right. So it's really interesting to be able to share both of those aspects and applications of the work that we do. So
yeah. Did you ever sort of, at one stage, you wanted to pursue a medical career?
Yeah, so I do. So the great thing is I still get to have my hands in the medical side of things, so biomedical research. And, PhD is good. I think at this point, if I were to do medicine, I wouldn't actually be a practicing physician until in my 50s. So I think I'm good. And go into a lot of debt too, by the way. So I'm good. I'm perfectly happy to be exactly where I'm at. And it was something that was of interest to me, but I feel like I kind of get the best of all worlds now, where I get to do this kind of research. I get to still do work in the clinical space and the research side of things, but yeah, just kind of staying on the research end of things.
And obviously, you're able to travel around in the States at the moment, so you'll be going to NEEMO this year.
Probably not this year. We'll see. I mean, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. So it's kind of everything's getting a feel for how things are unfolding. We've got a couple of other academic conferences too later this fall that it would be fantastic to attend. But if it doesn't feel safe enough, then we won't. I'm vaccinated now, so I'm thankful to be one of those people here in the U.S. That has been able to get fully vaccinated. And I know we're all going to be in that space here by summertime, so that'll be excellent. So.
And hopefully then the world will open up again and you'll be able to come out and join us in either Australia or back to Singapore for the ADEX show.
Both. I think both would be fantastic.
Yeah. And that really would be good. Dawn, we're just at the end of our session. So thank you so much for making the effort to get up early and join us. That was very much appreciated. It was lovely to see you again. And hopefully it won't be too long before we can catch up live.
Yeah, absolutely.
So at this stage, Nora, do you want to close?
Yes, I am. Just give me a moment. Okay. So I would like to say thank you to Dawn for being here to share with us a little bit more about all the exciting adventures that one could explore from diving itself, and of course the share of your love for cave diving. I think it's amazing. And we had Dawn before, and you did a session with us with regards to the physiology aspect of diving, and you did that presentation. I think that was amazing. So thank you so much for your time, and of course, last but not least, thank you so much, Trikey, for doing this session with us.
It's a pleasure. So once again, Nora, thank you. Dawn, thank you, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you guys so much for everything.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.